As corporate helicopters hovered over the pristine Oakridge Valley at daybreak, no one suspected that the weathered farmer who had rescued an injured hiker from a treacherous ravine the previous evening harbored insights about sustainable agriculture so revolutionary that their implementation would force one of the world's largest technology companies to abandon a billion-dollar development project and reimagine the future of eco-conscious innovation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and freshly turned soil across Jackson Miller's orchard as the 63-year-old farmer methodically inspected his heritage apple trees. Decades of working this land had etched deep lines into his weathered face and strong hands, each wrinkle a testament to years spent in harmony with the seasons. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows across the rolling hills of Oakridge Valley, a place largely untouched by the technological revolution, reshaping cities just 100 miles away. Jackson had inherited this 200-acre farm from his father, who had received it from his father before him, 5 generations of millers who had stewarded this land through depression, drought, and the relentless pressure of industrial agriculture. While neighboring farms had sold to developers or consolidated into massive operations, Jackson remained committed to the sustainable, diverse farming practices his ancestors had refined through generations of trial and error. "These Gravenstein apples need another week," he murmured to himself, gently cradling a fruit in his calloused palm. The heirloom variety was nearly extinct in commercial orchards, but thrived under Jackson's careful attention. His farm had become something of a living seed bank, preserving dozens of fruit and vegetable varieties that had disappeared from supermarket shelves, deemed too delicate for mass production or too inconsistent for consumer expectations. The distant ringing of his landline phone interrupted his assessment. Jackson rarely carried his cell phone into the orchard. It was one of the few modern conveniences he reluctantly embraced, and only then, because his daughter Sarah insisted she needed a way to reach him in emergencies. He wiped his hands on faded denim overalls and made his way toward the farmhouse, a century-old structure of weathered timber and fieldstone that stood as testament to craftsmanship long forgotten in an age of prefabricated efficiency. "Jackson speaking," he answered, cradling the receiver between ear and shoulder as he poured himself a glass of water from the kitchen sink. "Dad, did you hear the news?" Sarah's voice carried the rushed excitement of the city life she'd chosen over farming. "Helios Tech just announced a major development project for Oakridge Valley. They're calling it Innovation Haven, or something equally pretentious. It's all over the local news." Jackson's grip tightened on the glass. "Can't say I had been working the North Orchard since sunrise. They're planning some massive campus, research facilities, housing developments, the works. They're promising jobs and economic revitalization. And I'm sure they're promising to maintain the rural character while they're at it," Jackson replied, the skepticism in his voice born from decades watching developers transform neighboring communities with similar promises. "Where exactly are they planning to build this paradise?" The silence that followed told him everything. The old Henderson property? The Wallace farm? Where, Sarah? "They haven't announced specific locations yet," she answered carefully. "But the proposal mentions consolidating several thousand acres in the valley center. Dad, this could actually be good for the community. The school is down to half the students it had when I attended, and the younger families keep moving away for work." Jackson gazed out his kitchen window at the valley that had cradled his family for generations. The afternoon sun illuminated the patchwork of small farms, woodlands, and meadows stretching toward the distant mountains. To outsiders, it might appear unchanged from a century ago, but Jackson's trained eye could spot the subtle shifts. Abandoned barns slowly reclaimed by nature, fallow fields where diverse crops once grew, hedgerows removed to accommodate larger equipment. "I need to finish with the Gravensteins before that storm rolls in," he said finally. "We'll talk about this when you visit this weekend." After hanging up, Jackson returned to his orchard. But Sarah's news had unsettled something. Deep within him, Helios Tech was no ordinary company. Founded by Wunderkind CEO Adrian Zhao, the technology giant had grown from a garage startup to one of the most powerful corporations in the world in less than 15 years. Their innovations in artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and biotechnology had transformed entire industries, and their market capitalization exceeded the GDP of many nations. What could such a company want with Oakridge Valley? The rural community offered no particular strategic advantages, no major transportation hubs, no established tech workforce, no prestigious universities churning out computer science graduates. Just clean air, clean water, and some of the most fertile soil in the region. As Jackson moved methodically through his orchard, the familiar work allowed his mind to process Sarah's news. The valley had faced development pressures before, but nothing of this magnitude. Small farms like his operated on razor-thin margins, vulnerable to even minor shifts in the local economy. A development of the scale Sarah described would irrevocably alter the character and ecology of the entire region. The distant sound of thunder prompted Jackson to gather his tools. The weather report had predicted an early evening thunderstorm, unusual for October, but increasingly common as climate patterns shifted in ways that challenged generations of farming wisdom. He secured the orchard gate and was heading toward the equipment barn when a different sound caught his attention. Not thunder, but a human cry, faint but distinct, coming from the direction of Eagle's Ridge. Jackson hesitated only briefly before changing course. Eagle's Ridge bordered the eastern edge of his property, a steep, rocky formation popular with hikers accessing the wilderness area beyond. Though the main trail ran along the opposite side of the ridge, Jackson had occasionally encountered lost hikers who had strayed onto his land. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall as Jackson made his way up the rugged slope, guided by another cry, weaker this time. The path was treacherous even in good conditions, loose shale and exposed, roots creating natural traps for the unwary. In the gathering storm, with visibility diminishing by the minute, it became downright dangerous. "Hello?" Jackson called, his voice competing with the strengthening wind. "Where are you?" "Here." The response came from a narrow ledge about 30 feet below the ridge's crest. "I'm stuck. My leg. I can't move." Jackson carefully navigated toward the voice, finding a precarious path down to the ledge where a man lay partly sheltered by an overhanging rock. Even in the fading light, Jackson could see the unnatural angle of the man's right leg and the pallor of shock on his face. "Don't try to move," Jackson instructed, kneeling beside the injured hiker. "I'm Jackson Miller. This is my farm you've landed on." "Adam," the man managed through gritted teeth. "Adam Chen. I was hiking and lost the main trail, thought I could find a shortcut back." Stupid mistake. Rain was now falling in earnest, the temperature dropping rapidly with the storm front. Jackson quickly assessed the situation with the practical efficiency of someone accustomed to solving problems with limited resources. The hiker's injury appeared serious, likely a compound fracture, and the increasingly hazardous conditions made a self-rescue impossible. They needed help, but the remote location meant emergency services would take time to reach them if they could navigate the treacherous terrain at all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Cell service is spotty up here, but let me try to call for help, Jackson said, pulling out the phone he thankfully had in his pocket. As expected, no signal bars appeared on the screen. We're in a dead zone. Listen, Adam, I can't safely move you with that injury, but I can't leave you exposed to this storm either. I'm going to create some temporary shelter, then go get help. Working with the efficiency born from decades of practical problem-solving, Jackson created a makeshift shelter using his waterproof jacket and nearby branches. He stabilized Adam's injured leg as best he could, using his belt and strips torn from his own shirt, applying the first aid knowledge he'd acquired through years of self-sufficient farm life. The nearest hospital is in Riverdale, almost 40 minutes away, Jackson explained as he worked. But my farmhouse is just down the slope. I've got a landline there and a friend with a medical background. Once I reach them, we'll come back with proper equipment to get you down safely. Adam nodded weakly, his face ashen with pain and the onset of shock. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't heard me. Save your strength, Jackson replied simply. I'll be back as quickly as I can. Here's some water and my pocket knife. 3 sharp blasts on this whistle if you hear anyone else before I return. The journey back to the farmhouse was treacherous in the worsening storm, but Jackson navigated the familiar terrain with the sure-footedness of someone who had walked these paths in all conditions. Upon reaching the house, he immediately called both emergency services and his neighbor, Dr. Eleanor Reeves, a retired surgeon who had moved to Oakridge Valley seeking a quieter life after 30 years in emergency medicine. I can be there in 10 minutes, Eleanor promised after hearing Jackson's description of the injury. I'll bring my medical bag. Don't wait for the ambulance. With this storm, they'll never make it up that ridge. We'll need to stabilize him and bring him down ourselves. While waiting for Eleanor, Jackson gathered emergency supplies, a proper first aid kit, ropes, his sturdiest tarp, a thermos of hot broth, dry blankets, and a collapsible stretcher he kept for farm emergencies. Years of self-reliance had taught him to be prepared for situations exactly like this. Eleanor arrived driving her modified Jeep, equipped with off-road tires that could handle the farm's rugged access roads better than an ambulance. Together they made their way back up the ridge as quickly as safety allowed, the rain now coming down in sheets that transformed parts of the path into miniature waterfalls. They found Adam conscious but shivering violently, the early stages of hypothermia compounding his injury. Eleanor's assessment was swift and professional. Compound fracture of the tibia, possible fibular involvement as well. He's losing blood and showing signs of shock. We need to stabilize this fracture properly and get him warm before we move him. Working together in the cramped space of the makeshift shelter, they cleaned and properly splinted Adam's leg, administered first aid for shock, and wrapped him in emergency blankets. The process was painful for Adam, who bit down on a leather strap Jackson provided rather than cry out. "You've got the constitution of a farmer," Jackson remarked, impressed by the man's stoicism. Most city folks I know would be screaming the ridge down. Not my first broken bone. Adam managed, his voice strained but steady, though definitely the worst. With the fracture stabilized and Adam bundled against the elements, they carefully transferred him to the stretcher. The descent was slow and precarious, each step calculated to minimize jostling the injured leg. Jackson took the heavier front end of the stretcher, his strength and familiarity with the terrain proving invaluable as they navigated the slippery path. Eleanor monitored Adam's condition throughout, administering pain medication from her medical kit when necessary. By the time they reached the farmhouse, the storm had intensified into a full gale, making the planned transfer to the hospital impossible. Eleanor conferred briefly with emergency services by phone. "The road to Riverdale is flooded in 2 places," she reported. "They're recommending we shelter in place unless his condition deteriorates significantly. I've updated them on his status and my credentials. They'll dispatch an ambulance as soon as conditions allow." "Then we make him comfortable here," Jackson decided, already clearing space in his living room. "The sofa pulls out into a bed. I've got plenty of supplies. A generator, if the power goes, and enough food to wait out any storm." They settled Adam on the sofa bed, elevating his injured leg and establishing an impromptu medical station nearby. Eleanor, after consulting with her colleagues at Riverdale Hospital via phone, administered intravenous fluids and stronger pain medication from her personal supplies, a remnant of her days volunteering with wilderness rescue teams. "You're lucky Mr. Miller found you when he did," Eleanor told Adam as she checked his vitals. "Another hour in that storm, with that blood loss and dropping temperature? Well, let's just say farmers make excellent rescuers. They're used to solving problems with whatever's at hand." Adam's gaze shifted to Jackson, who was stoking a fire in the stone hearth that dominated one wall of the living room. "I can't thank you enough. Both of you. I don't know many people who would scale a ridge in a thunderstorm to help a stranger." Jackson shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Anyone around here would have done the same. Valley folks look out for each other." He hesitated, then added, "Though we don't get many hikers on that part of the ridge. It's pretty far from the marked trails." A flicker of something, discomfort, guilt, crossed Adam's face. "I was exploring. I'd heard about some unique geological formations in this area." Eleanor raised an eyebrow but kept her focus on adjusting the IV drip. "Well, your exploring nearly cost you your leg, possibly more. You're stable for now, but you'll need surgery to properly set that bone once we can transport you safely." "I understand, and I'll cover any expenses, of course." Jackson waved away the offer. "We can worry about all that later. For now, you should rest. Storm's not going anywhere soon by the sound of it." As if to emphasize his point, a tremendous thunderclap shook the old farmhouse, followed immediately by the lights flickering and dying. Without missing a beat, Jackson lit several oil lamps placed strategically around the room and excused himself to start the generator. Left momentarily alone with Adam, Eleanor studied the injured man more carefully. Despite his current bedraggled state, certain details stood out. The quality of his hiking clothes, the high-end smartwatch on his wrist, the subtle but unmistakable signs of someone accustomed to comfort and authority. His backpack, which Jackson had retrieved along with him, was a top-of-the-line model that cost more than many locals earned in a week. "You're not from around here," she observed, more statement than question. Adam managed a wan smile. "That obvious, huh? No, I'm from San Francisco originally. Just visiting the area. Quite a coincidence, ending up injured on one of the few remaining family farms in the valley. Before Adam could respond, Jackson returned, the reassuring hum of the generator accompanying him. Power restored, the room's modern amenities, lights, electric heating, medical equipment, resumed functioning, creating an incongruous blend of century-old architecture and contemporary technology. "Generator's good for about 3 days on the fuel we have," Jackson reported. "Radio says the storm system is stalled over us, likely to continue through tomorrow at least. Roads to town are definitely washed out along the lower valley." "Then I guess I'm imposing on your hospitality a bit longer than planned," Adam said, grimacing as he shifted position slightly. "I'm sorry for the trouble." "No trouble," Jackson assured him, though his eyes reflected concern about something beyond their immediate situation. "Eleanor, will you stay the night? The guest room is made up." "Of course, I should monitor him anyway, and I wouldn't fancy driving back in this." As Eleanor stepped into the kitchen to make a fresh pot of tea using the restored electricity, Jackson moved closer to Adam's bedside, speaking in a lower tone. "I don't mean to pry into a man's business, especially when he's injured, but I'm curious what brings a person so clearly not from these parts to a remote section of Eagle's Ridge during storm season." Adam held Jackson's gaze for a long moment before answering. "Research," he said finally. "I was researching the area. Scientific research, historical. Most researchers contact landowners before crossing their property. It's complicated. Professional research, let's say." Adam winced, whether from pain or the questioning wasn't clear. "I should probably rest now, if you don't mind. The medication is making me drowsy." Jackson nodded, recognizing the deflection, but choosing not to press further. "Of course. We'll be nearby if you need anything." As Adam drifted into a medication-induced sleep, Jackson joined Eleanor in the kitchen, keeping his voice low. "There's something off about our guest," he confided, accepting the mug of tea she offered. "That section of the ridge overlooks the entire Central Valley. It's also directly adjacent to the Henderson and Wallace properties, the 2 largest abandoned farms in the area." Eleanor's expression sharpened with understanding. "You think he's connected to the Helios development Sarah mentioned, perhaps surveying potential sites?" "It would explain why someone with his background would be hiking off-trail in such treacherous conditions. Developers often do preliminary site assessments before making public announcements." "That's quite a leap, based on expensive hiking gear and vague answers," Eleanor cautioned, though her tone suggested she found the theory plausible. "Though I admit he doesn't strike me as your average nature enthusiast." Jackson sipped his tea thoughtfully. "Sarah said the announcement just happened today. If he is connected to Helios, he might not realize we've heard about the development plans yet. And what if he is? What does it matter if you found him or someone else did?" Jackson's weathered features settled into determined lines. "Because if Helios is eyeing this valley for development, they'll need to understand what they're really dealing with. This isn't just land for the taking. It's a complex ecosystem, both natural and human, that can't be replaced once destroyed." Eleanor studied her old friend with concern. "Jackson, you can't stop a company like Helios if they've set their sights here. They have resources beyond imagination." "I'm not planning to stand in front of bulldozers, if that's what you're worried about," Jackson replied with a wry smile. "But knowledge is its own kind of power. If our guest is indeed connected to this development, perhaps his unexpected stay at a fifth-generation sustainable farm might prove educational. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the old farmhouse's sturdy frame. Inside, Adam Chen slept fitfully on the sofa bed, unaware that his rescue might have set in motion events that would challenge the very project he had come to advance. Jackson moved to the window, gazing out at the darkness where his beloved valley lay shrouded in storm. 5 generations of his family had weathered literal and figurative storms on this land. Whatever Helios Tech had planned, whatever role their injured guest played in those plans, Jackson was determined that the wisdom accumulated through those generations would not be silenced in the rush toward a future that recognized only novelty as progress. As if sensing his thoughts, Eleanor joined him at the window. "You're planning something, aren't you?" Jackson's reflection in the rain-streaked glass showed a face as resolute as the land itself. "Not planning exactly, but I believe everything happens for a reason, Eleanor. That young man didn't end up on my farm by accident. And I didn't spend my life learning how to work with nature instead of against it, just to watch it all get paved over without at least sharing what I know." Eleanor placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "Well, if anyone can make someone from Helios Tech see this valley through different eyes, it's you. Just remember, corporations that size don't change course easily, even when presented with wisdom older than their CEO." "We'll see," Jackson replied, his gaze still fixed on the storm-darkened landscape beyond the glass. "We'll see." In the living room, Adam shifted in his sleep, his expensive smartwatch glinting in the firelight. The device briefly illuminated, displaying a series of missed notifications from contacts labeled only with initials. At the top, most recent and marked urgent, was a message from AZ that began, "Status update needed on Oakridge acquisition. Board meeting tomorrow requires." The screen dimmed again, unnoticed by either the sleeping tech company representative or the farmer whose life was about to become unexpectedly intertwined with forces that had reshaped entire industries. Outside, the storm continued unabated, nature asserting its power over human plans and timelines. A reminder that some forces could not be controlled, only respected and accommodated. As the night deepened, Jackson Miller sat in his grandfather's rocking chair, keeping watch over their injured guest, while Eleanor caught a few hours of sleep in the guest room. The rhythmic creaking of the handcrafted chair against the hardwood floor blended with the storm sounds into a symphony that had accompanied generations of Millers through nights of uncertainty and contemplation. The old farmhouse stood firm against the gale, its foundations deep and its construction thoughtful, much like the farming practices Jackson had spent his life perfecting. Both represented an approach to building that considered longevity over immediate gain, resilience over efficiency, and harmony with natural forces rather than dominance over them. If Helios Tech did indeed have designs on Oakridge Valley, Jackson reflected, these were the principles they would need to understand. Not as quaint rural sentimentality, but as practical wisdom essential for truly sustainable development. Whether their injured representative would prove receptive to such lessons remained to be seen, but the storm had given Jackson an unexpected opportunity to try. Outside, rain continued to pour from skies that had nourished this land long before the First Miller arrived and would continue long after the last corporate campus had crumbled back to dust. The farmer took comfort in this perspective as he settled in for the long vigil ahead, watching over a man who had come to survey his valley for very different purposes than anyone might have anticipated. Dawn broke over Oakridge Valley with the particular clarity that follows a powerful storm. The rain had ceased sometime in the early morning hours, leaving behind a landscape washed clean, colors intensified as though nature had polished every leaf and stone. Light spilled through the farmhouse windows in golden shafts as Jackson quietly prepared breakfast, careful not to disturb Adam, who had finally fallen into deep sleep after a night of intermittent pain and fever. Eleanor joined Jackson in the kitchen, accepting a steaming mug of coffee with a grateful nod. "His temperature's down," she reported in a low voice. "The antibiotics seem to be working." "How are the roads looking?" Jackson gestured toward the ancient radio on the counter, its dial illuminated in the dim kitchen. "County Emergency Services reports the main road to Riverdale should be cleared by noon. The bridge at Willow Creek held, which is the good news. We can get him to the hospital once they give the all clear." They ate breakfast in companionable silence, two people accustomed to early mornings and the quiet appreciation of simple things done well. Fresh eggs from Jackson's hens, homemade bread, preserves from last summer's berries. Outside, the farm gradually came to life as the sun rose higher, chickens clucking in their coop, a pair of cardinals calling from the apple trees, the distant lowing of cattle from neighboring pastures. The peaceful scene was interrupted by the harsh electronic chirping of Adam's phone, which Jackson had recovered from the hiker's backpack and plugged in to charge overnight. The device vibrated insistently on the kitchen counter, displaying a name that made Jackson freeze mid-bite. Adrian Zhao, Helios CEO. "That's interesting," Eleanor murmured, eyebrows raised as she noticed Jackson's reaction. "Our hiker has direct access to the CEO of one of the world's largest tech companies." Before Jackson could respond, a groan from the living room indicated their patient was awake. Eleanor immediately shifted into medical mode, moving to check on Adam, while Jackson remained in the kitchen, staring at the now silent phone as though it might contain explosive secrets. After a moment's hesitation, he followed Eleanor, carrying a tray with a simple breakfast and fresh water. Adam was attempting to sit up, his face tight with pain, but his color noticeably better than the previous evening. He accepted Jackson's help, adjusting his position, then the offered food with visible gratitude. "The road should be clear enough to get you to Riverdale Hospital by early afternoon," Jackson informed him, keeping his tone neutral despite the questions now burning in his mind. "Dr. Reeves thinks your leg will need surgery, but they'll be better equipped to assess that at the hospital." Adam nodded, taking a cautious sip of water. "I can't thank you both enough. I've already imposed more than I had any right to expect." "Your phone was ringing earlier," Jackson said, watching Adam's face carefully. "Seemed important. Someone named Adrian Zhao." The change in Adam's expression was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around the eyes, a momentary stillness, like a deer catching a hunter's scent. "Ah, yes, my boss. He's probably wondering why I missed our morning call." "Your boss," Jackson repeated slowly. "Adrian Zhao, the CEO of Helios Tech, personally calls you for morning check-ins." Adam set down his water glass with deliberate care. "You recognize the name?" "Hard not to these days, especially since Helios just announced plans to develop a major project right here in Oakridge Valley." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken realizations. Adam's gaze shifted between Jackson and Eleanor, assessing, recalculating. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, the casual tone replaced by something more measured, more professional. I should probably introduce myself properly. I'm Adam Chen, Chief Innovation Officer at Helios Tech. Adrian Zhao is indeed my boss, and yes, we typically connect every morning to discuss ongoing projects. He paused, then added with a rueful smile, including potential sites for our Oakridge Valley initiative. Jackson absorbed this confirmation without visible reaction, though Eleanor could see the tightening of his shoulders, the subtle straightening of his spine, physical manifestations of the farmer preparing for yet another battle to protect his land. And what brought Helios Tech's Chief Innovation Officer to a dangerous ridge overlooking my farm during a storm? Jackson asked, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of challenge. Adam hesitated, visibly weighing his options. I prefer to personally survey potential development areas before making recommendations. Satellite imagery and topographical maps only tell you so much. I was trying to get a better perspective on how the Central Valley properties connect. Specifically, the Henderson and Wallace farms, which we've already entered into preliminary acquisition discussions for. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. Those properties have been abandoned for years. Not surprised the owners would sell, but you're looking at more than just those two farms, aren't you? The project as envisioned would require approximately 4,000 acres, Adam confirmed, his professional demeanor now fully in place despite his prone position and injured leg. We're considering a phased approach over 5 years. 4,000 acres, Jackson repeated, the enormity of the scale settling like a weight on his chest. Nearly half the arable land in the valley. Adam's phone chimed again with a text notification. Eleanor, who was checking his vital signs, couldn't help but notice the message preview on the screen. Acquisition team needs urgent update. Board meeting pushed up. Call ASAP. AZ. Seems. Your boss is getting impatient, she observed, stepping back from the sofa. Perhaps you should return his call. Jackson has a landline you can use if your cell service is spotty. Adam looked uncomfortable, glancing at his expensive smartwatch. I should probably speak with him privately. Could I trouble you for the landline? Jackson hesitated only briefly before nodding. The study down the hall has a phone. Door closes. For privacy. Need help getting there? With Jackson's assistance, Adam maneuvered from the sofa to the study, keeping his splintered leg elevated on a rolling office chair that Eleanor quickly adapted for the purpose. Once settled at the desk, Adam thanked them again, his expression a complex mixture of professional concern and genuine gratitude. Take your time, Jackson said, closing the door behind him. Eleanor and I need to check on the farm anyway. Storm, like that, always leaves some damage to tend to. Outside, in the crisp morning air, Eleanor followed Jackson as he conducted a methodical inspection of the property, checking fences, outbuildings, and drainage systems with the practiced efficiency of someone who had weathered countless storms. Though his movements were purposeful, she could sense the tension radiating from him, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. So, she ventured finally, helping him right a toppled beehive, the man you rescued from certain death is working for the company, planning to transform the valley. That's quite a coincidence. Jackson grunted non-committally, carefully examining the hive for damage. No such thing as coincidence, my father used to say. Just opportunities we haven't recognized yet. And what opportunity do you see in having Helios Tech's Chief Innovation Officer literally captive in your home? The question hung in the air as Jackson finished securing the beehive, ensuring the colony inside remained undisturbed. When he straightened and turned to face Eleanor, his weathered features had settled into an expression of calm resolve she recognized from previous community battles, zoning disputes, water rights conflicts, corporate farming encroachments. Jackson Miller might present himself as a simple farmer, but Eleanor had witnessed the strategic intellect that lay beneath that unassuming exterior. "An opportunity to educate," he said finally. "Adam Chen isn't just any corporate executive. His title is Chief Innovation Officer, but from what I've read, he's considered the ecological conscience of Helios. He pioneered their sustainable campus designs, their renewable energy initiatives. He's someone who might actually understand what's at stake here." "Understanding and acting are different things," Eleanor cautioned. "He still answers to a board of directors, to shareholders expecting returns on investment." "True enough," Jackson acknowledged, leading the way toward the orchard to check for storm damage. "But right now, he's answering to me and you. He's seeing this valley not through satellite images or property surveys, but as an actual place where people live in relationship with the land. That counts for something." As they entered the orchard, the devastation from the storm became more apparent. Several ancient apple trees had been uprooted by the high winds, their massive root systems now exposed like gnarled hands reaching from the earth. Jackson moved among the fallen patriarchs with reverent sadness, touching their bark as one might comfort a dying friend. "These trees were planted by my great-grandfather," he explained, kneeling to examine one particularly massive trunk. "Some varieties you can't find anymore except in heritage collections. Each one carries genetics adapted specifically to this valley over generations. Disease resistance, drought tolerance, unique flavor profiles. You can't replace that with saplings from a commercial nursery." Eleanor watched as Jackson carefully collected scion wood, cuttings from the fallen trees that could be grafted onto new rootstock to preserve their genetic heritage. His movements were precise, almost ceremonial, each cut wrapped in damp cloth and labeled with the variety name and location in the orchard. "This is what companies like Helios don't understand when they see land as just square footage for development," he continued, securing the precious cuttings in his pack. "They measure value in quarterly earnings and shareholder returns. But how do you quantify the value of an apple variety that took a century to adapt perfectly to this microclimate? Or the network of mycorrhizal fungi in healthy soil that took generations to establish? Or the indigenous knowledge about this landscape preserved in families like mine?" The passion in Jackson's voice was unmistakable, not angry, but deeply convicted. Eleanor had heard elements of this perspective over their years of friendship, but never articulated with such clarity and purpose. She realized he was rehearsing, preparing his case for the man currently using his telephone to communicate with one of the most powerful technology companies on the planet. "You're hoping to convince Adam Chen that Helios should abandon its development plans," she surmised. Jackson carefully secured his pack of scion wood before responding. "Not abandon, reimagine. If they're determined to build here, then it should be something that works with this valley's natural systems, not against them. Something that preserves agricultural heritage while creating new opportunities. Something that recognizes the value in both innovation and tradition." Eleanor considered this as they continued their inspection of the storm damage. That's quite an ambitious goal for a conversation with an injured executive who probably just wants to get back to his corporate headquarters as soon as possible. Sometimes the most important conversations happen when we least expect them, Jackson replied with a small smile. Besides, he's not going anywhere until the road's clear and that leg gets proper medical attention. Seems like a shame to waste the opportunity. They worked together through the morning, clearing debris, documenting damage for insurance purposes, and securing vulnerable structures against the possibility of additional storms. Jackson's methodical approach to these tasks reflected the same patient persistence that had characterized his farming practices, addressing immediate needs while always keeping long-term sustainability in mind. When they returned to the farmhouse around midday, they found Adam had completed his calls and managed to return to the sofa. His professional composure remained intact, but exhaustion and pain were evident in the tightness around his eyes, the careful way he held himself. "Emergency services called while you were out," he informed them. "The road to Riverdale is officially open. They're sending an ambulance within the hour." "Good timing," Eleanor replied, immediately checking his temperature and pulse. "How's the pain level?" "Manageable," Adam answered diplomatically, though his complexion suggested otherwise. "I've been keeping the leg elevated as you instructed." Jackson nodded approvingly, then gestured toward a collection of mud-spattered folders and papers on the coffee table. "I see you've been keeping busy despite your medical condition." Adam glanced at the documents: preliminary site assessments, environmental impact projections, community economic forecasts that he had retrieved from his weatherproof backpack. "I figured I should make productive use of the time. Our board meeting has been moved up and Adrian, Mr. Zhao, is expecting detailed recommendations on the Oakridge project." "And what will you recommend?" Jackson asked, the question direct but not confrontational. Adam studied the farmer for a moment before answering. "That's still under consideration. There are multiple factors to balance." Jackson moved to the window, gazing out at his farm. The ancient barn with its hand-hewn beams, the careful patchwork of fields, orchards, and integrated livestock areas, the hedgerows and water management systems designed to work with natural contours and rainfall patterns. When he turned back to Adam, his expression was thoughtful rather than adversarial. "I'd like to show you something before the ambulance arrives," he said, "if you're up for a short trip. Nothing strenuous. We can use the farm utility vehicle." Adam appeared surprised by the offer, but after a moment's consideration nodded. "I'd appreciate that, actually. Seeing more of your operation might help provide context for my assessment." With Eleanor's assistance, they carefully transferred Adam to Jackson's electric utility vehicle, a concession to modern technology the farmer had made after calculating its lower environmental impact compared to traditional gas-powered equipment. With Adam securely seated and his leg properly supported, Jackson drove them slowly around the perimeter of the main farmstead. Fifth-generation sustainable agriculture looks different from what most people picture when they think of farming, Jackson explained as they moved past carefully designed crop rotations, integrated livestock paddocks, and water retention systems. "We're not just growing food, we're building soil health, sequestering carbon, maintaining biodiversity, and preserving agricultural heritage." Adam absorbed the information with evident interest, asking surprisingly technical questions about soil microbiome management, heritage seed preservation, and hydrological cycling. As they talked, Jackson realized that beneath the corporate title, Adam Chen possessed genuine environmental knowledge and concern, perhaps more than he'd initially given the executive credit for. "Your operation is impressive," Adam acknowledged. As they paused at a vantage point overlooking the valley, the integration of traditional methods with appropriate technology is particularly noteworthy. Few farms manage to balance those elements effectively. "That balance is what's missing from most development projects," Jackson replied, seeing an opening to address the elephant in the room. "They either try to erase everything that came before and impose entirely new systems, or they preserve view token historical elements as mere decoration, while fundamentally changing the landscape's function." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "It's a valid criticism. The development industry has a poor track record of respecting existing ecosystems and cultural contexts. That's something I've been working to change at Helios." "Is that possible with a project of the scale you're planning here? 4,000 acres transformed into corporate campuses, housing developments, and support infrastructure will fundamentally alter the valley's hydrology, biodiversity, and agricultural potential. No matter how many green roofs or sustainable design elements you incorporate, the challenge was direct but delivered without hostility." Adam considered his response carefully, his gaze sweeping across the valley that Helios planned to transform. "The original concept calls for significant density, yes," he admitted. "The economic models are based on certain scale requirements to justify the infrastructure investments. But there's growing internal debate about whether our standard approach is appropriate for this location. That's partly why I was conducting personal site assessments." Jackson recognized an opening and decided to press further. What if there was an alternative approach, one that achieved Helios's objectives while preserving the valley's agricultural heritage and ecological function? Adam raised an eyebrow. His professional interest clearly piqued despite his physical discomfort. "I'd be interested to hear such a proposal." As they slowly circled back toward the farmhouse, Jackson outlined a vision that had been forming in his mind since Sarah's call the previous day, an integrated development model that would preserve the most productive agricultural land, while clustering necessary buildings along already disturbed areas, incorporating working farms into the campus design, and establishing educational partnerships to maintain and disseminate agricultural knowledge. Imagine a technology campus where employees don't just work in sterile office environments, but participate in food production and ecological stewardship, Jackson suggested. Where innovation isn't just about digital progress, but includes agricultural, resilience, and sustainability. Where new housing doesn't replace farmland, but incorporates productive landscapes into its very design. Adam listened with increasing interest, occasionally interjecting questions or considerations about practical implementation. By the time they returned to the farmhouse, where Eleanor was preparing a light lunch before the ambulance arrived, the conversation had evolved from theoretical concepts to specific possibilities. "Your vision has merit," Adam acknowledged as Jackson helped him back to the sofa. "It aligns with some internal initiatives I've been advocating for, our living systems approach to campus design. But the scale would be unprecedented, and convincing the board to revise already advanced plans would be challenging. More challenging than explaining why Helios's chief innovation officer was personally surveying private property without permission and ended up injured on a local Farm? Eleanor asked innocently as she set down a tray of food. Adam had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I was on the public hiking trail before I took a detour. But point taken. This situation has created certain optics concerns. Or opportunities, Jackson suggested, accepting a bowl of homemade soup with a nod of thanks to Eleanor, depending on how you choose to frame it. The conversation paused as they ate, the simple meal of garden vegetable soup and fresh bread, offering tangible evidence of the farming philosophy Jackson had been describing. Food produced through methods that enhanced rather than depleted the land's vitality. As they finished eating, the distant sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. Eleanor moved to the window, confirming, "Ambulance is here, right on time." The arrival of medical professionals created a flurry of activity, assessment of Adam's condition, preparation for transport, completion of necessary paperwork. Throughout the process, Adam maintained his professional composure, though Jackson noticed him watching the farmhouse with a contemplative expression as the paramedics prepared to move him to the ambulance. "Mr. Miller," Adam said, as they were about to depart, "I'd appreciate the opportunity to continue our discussion once I'm medically stabilized. Perhaps I could return when I'm more mobile, with your permission, of course." Jackson studied the younger man, noting the sincerity in his expression. "My door's always open to those genuinely interested in understanding this valley, and please, it's Jackson." "Jackson," Adam echoed with a nod. "Thank you again, both of you, for everything. I'll be in touch soon." As the ambulance departed down the recently cleared farm road, Eleanor stood beside Jackson on the porch, both watching until the vehicle disappeared around a bend. "Do you think you got through to him?" she asked. Jackson considered the question, absently rubbing a piece of scion wood in his pocket, a physical reminder of the heritage he was working to preserve. "I think he was already questioning the standard approach before he ended up on my farm. Whether that translates to meaningful changes in Helios's plans remains to be seen. He seemed genuinely interested in your integrated development model. Interest doesn't always translate to action, especially when billion-dollar investments and corporate boards are involved," Jackson replied pragmatically. "But at least the conversation has begun. That's more than we had yesterday." Eleanor nodded, understanding the measured optimism in her friend's perspective. "What will you do now?" Jackson surveyed his storm-damaged farm, mentally cataloguing the work ahead. Fallen trees to clear, fences to repair, crops to assess. The challenges were substantial, but not insurmountable. Like every storm before, this one would become part of the farm's history, a reminder of resilience rather than defeat. "Same thing I do every day," he answered with quiet certainty. "Tend what needs tending, prepare for what's coming, and remain open to unexpected possibilities." Inside the departing ambulance, Adam Chen made another call to Adrian Zhao, this time with a significantly different perspective on Oakridge Valley than he had possessed 24 hours earlier. As the farmhouse receded in the distance, he found himself already mentally drafting a revised proposal, one that might honor both Helios's ambitions and the wisdom of 5 generations of sustainable agriculture. The conversation had only just begun. 3 days later, Jackson was carefully grafting scion wood from the fallen heritage apple trees onto young rootstock when Sarah's car appeared on the farm road, dust billowing behind it as she drove with uncharacteristic speed. She parked haphazardly beside the equipment barn and hurried toward him, waving a tablet in one hand. "Dad, have you seen this?" she called, her expression a mixture of confusion and excitement. "It's all over the business news. Helios Tech has paused their Oakridge Valley development pending a comprehensive reassessment of approach and integration with existing agricultural systems." "What did you do?" Jackson carefully set down his grafting knife and removed his work gloves before accepting the tablet. The article featured an official Helios statement announcing the project review, alongside a photograph of Adrian Zhao standing beside none other than Adam Chen, who was pictured on crutches with his leg in a professional medical boot. The caption identified Chen as Chief Innovation Officer and newly appointed Director of Helios Living Systems Initiative. "I didn't do anything," Jackson replied truthfully, handing the tablet back to Sarah. "I just showed someone what was already here, what's been here for generations, and suggested there might be another way forward." Sarah stared at her father incredulously. "And Helios Tech, one of the most powerful corporations on the planet, just decided to reconsider their entire development strategy, just like that?" Jackson smiled, returning to the delicate process of grafting heritage genetics onto new growth, a tacky, fitting metaphor for what might now be possible in Oakridge Valley. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to demonstrate that alternatives exist. People can't choose paths they don't know are possible. As Sarah continued to express amazement at this unexpected development, Jackson's attention returned to the careful work of his hands, securing the future of apple varieties his great-grandfather had nurtured that would now potentially continue for generations to come. The outcome of Helios's reassessment remained uncertain, but a door had opened where previously stood a wall. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering again over the mountains, but Jackson felt no apprehension. Every storm brought both challenge and renewal, destruction and opportunity. The wisdom lay not in avoiding storms, but in understanding how to work with them, how to bend without breaking, how to preserve what matters most while adapting to changing conditions. It was a wisdom 5 generations in the making. A wisdom now potentially influencing the future of one of the world's most powerful technology companies, all because a simple farmer had heard a cry for help on a storm-swept ridge and responded with both immediate compassion and long-term vision. Sarah's phone chimed with a notification, drawing her attention back to the screen. "There's more," she reported, eyes widening. "Adam Chen is requesting a meeting with local agricultural stakeholders to discuss integrated development approaches that honor existing land use practices while creating opportunities for technological innovation." "Dad, they're specifically mentioning heritage farming practices and sustainable agriculture as key considerations in the revised approach." Jackson nodded, a quiet satisfaction settling in his chest as he secured another successful graft, another tangible connection between past and future. "Then we'd better be prepared for that conversation. The valley's future depends on getting it right." In that moment, standing amid the apple trees his ancestors had planted and that his careful grafting would ensure continued long after him, Jackson Miller embodied the most essential kind of innovation. Not the creation of something entirely new, but the thoughtful integration of accumulated wisdom with emerging possibilities, rooted in respect for what came before while remaining open to what might come next. The corporate helicopters that had appeared on the horizon carried the potential for either destruction or transformation, Thanks to an unexpected encounter between a farmer and a tech executive, the balance had shifted, if only slightly, toward the latter, a reminder that even in an age dominated by technological disruption and corporate power, the quiet persistence of those who steward the land can still shape the narrative of progress in profound and unexpected ways. The storm clouds gathered, and Sarah continued sharing details from the developing story. Jackson returned to his grafting with renewed purpose. Whether Helios ultimately chose a truly integrated approach or reverted to conventional development models remained to be seen. But something fundamental had changed. A connection had been made, a perspective shifted, a possibility revealed. And in the careful joining of old wood to new, Jackson practiced the very philosophy he had shared with Adam Chen. Honoring heritage while embracing future growth, maintaining what works while adapting to changing conditions, finding the delicate balance point where tradition and innovation could strengthen rather than oppose each other. It was, in its own quiet way, revolutionary. 2 weeks after Adam Chen's departure from Oakridge Valley, Jackson found himself standing in a place he never expected to be, the gleaming headquarters of Helios Tech in San Francisco. The sleek glass and steel structure rose 40 stories into the fog-kissed skyline, its innovative design featuring vertical gardens and solar collection surfaces that had earned it multiple sustainability awards. It was as far from his weathered farmhouse as one could imagine in both appearance and philosophy. "Mr. Miller, welcome to Helios," greeted a polished receptionist in the vast atrium lobby. "Mr. Chen is expecting you. I'll escort you to the living systems floor." Jackson nodded, feeling distinctly out of place in his best flannel shirt and least worn jeans. He had deliberated over his attire for this unprecedented meeting, ultimately deciding authenticity mattered more than conformity. He was a farmer coming to speak about farming. Dressing like a corporate executive would undermine the very perspective he had been invited to share. The elevator ascended with silent efficiency to the 30th floor, where the doors opened, onto a space unlike anything Jackson had expected in a corporate headquarters. Instead of sterile cubicles and conference rooms, he found himself in what appeared to be a functioning indoor agricultural research facility. Raised beds of vegetables and herbs grew under specialized lighting designed to mimic natural sunlight patterns. Young fruit trees in smart monitoring containers lined the walls. Transparent displays showed real-time data on soil conditions, water cycling, and nutrient levels. "Impressive, isn't it?" came a familiar voice. Jackson turned to find Adam Chen approaching, still on crutches but moving with practiced ease. The executive looked different in his corporate environment, his casual hiking clothes replaced by sleek, minimal attire that somehow managed to appear both professional and avant-garde. Yet something in his demeanor remained unchanged, a genuine enthusiasm that transcended corporate polish. "It's unexpected," Jackson admitted, gesturing toward the growing systems. "Not what I pictured when imagining a tech company's offices." Adam smiled. "The Living Systems Initiative is my personal project. We're researching integrated agriculture approaches that can be incorporated into urban environments and our campus designs. Still in early stages, but promising." He led Jackson through the floor, introducing researchers and explaining various experiments in progress. Despite his corporate surroundings, Adam's passion for the work was evident. This wasn't mere window dressing or corporate social responsibility theater. There was serious science happening, genuine innovation focused on reconciling technology with natural systems. "You've created something remarkable here," Jackson acknowledged as they completed the tour. "But I'm curious why you've invited me. I'm hardly an expert in the kind of high-tech systems you're developing." Adam directed them toward a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. Unlike traditional corporate meeting spaces, this one featured living walls of plants, natural wood furnishings, and an informal arrangement that encouraged conversation rather than hierarchy. "That's precisely why you're here," Adam replied, gesturing for Jackson to take a seat. "We have plenty of technical experts, engineers who can design sensors and systems. What we lack is the multi-generational knowledge of working with land, the wisdom that can't be acquired through research, papers, or data analytics." Before Jackson could respond, the conference room door opened and Adrian Zhao himself entered. The legendary CEO of Helios was younger than Jackson had expected, barely 40, with the intense focus and barely contained energy that characterized many visionary entrepreneurs. What surprised Jackson most, however, was the genuine deference Zhao showed to Adam as he entered. "Adam, how's the leg healing? No need to stand," Zhao said, then turned to Jackson with an outstretched hand. "Mr. Miller, I can't thank you enough for not only saving my most valuable executive, but for making the journey to meet with us today. Your perspective is invaluable as we reconsider our Oakridge Valley approach." The meeting that followed was unlike any Jackson had experienced. Rather than being treated as a rural curiosity or an obstacle to progress, he found himself the focus of intense, respectful attention as he described the agricultural systems that had evolved in Oakridge Valley. Over generations, the water management approaches adapted to specific microclimates, the soil-building practices that had maintained fertility without chemical inputs, the biodiversity preservation that had protected heritage varieties through changing market demands. Zhao and Chen asked probing questions, occasionally consulting, with team members who joined virtually, taking notes and creating digital models based on Jackson's descriptions. The discussion evolved from abstract principles to specific applications for the Oakridge development, with Adam frequently referring to their conversations from the farmhouse. "What we're proposing," Zhao explained, bringing up a holographic display of the valley, "is a fundamental reconceptualization of our standard development model. Rather than clearing land for a conventional campus, we're exploring an integrated approach that preserves the most valuable agricultural areas while incorporating them into the design." The holographic display shifted, showing a distributed campus concept with buildings clustered on already disturbed land, connected by low-impact transportation corridors, with working agricultural zones maintained throughout. Jackson leaned forward, studying the model carefully. "You're proposing to maintain actual farming operations within the development?" he asked, unable to hide his surprise. "Not just maintain them," Adam clarified, "but make them central to the campus identity. We envision research partnerships with agricultural programs at state universities, incubator opportunities for young farmers using both traditional and technology-enhanced methods, and a food system that directly connects our employees and the surrounding community to the land." Jackson's skepticism warred with cautious hope as he studied the proposal. It was far from perfect, still requiring significant development in the valley, but it represented a radical departure from conventional corporate approaches that typically bulldozed existing land uses in favor of clean slate development. This is unexpected, he admitted finally. But I have concerns about implementation. Corporate visions often get compromised when they meet financial realities. Zhao nodded, his expression serious. A valid concern. That's why we're restructuring the project governance to include a Valley Stewardship Council with binding authority over environmental and agricultural decisions. A council we hope you'll consider joining. The conversation continued for hours, delving into specifics of water rights, conservation easements, architectural design informed by agricultural needs, and community integration. Throughout, Jackson found himself increasingly engaged, his initial defensive posture giving way to cautious collaboration as it became clear that both Zhao and Chen were genuinely committed to reimagining what corporate development could mean. As the meeting concluded and Jackson prepared to return to Oakridge Valley, Adam accompanied him to the elevator. "I know this is just the beginning of the conversation," the executive said. "There's much more to discuss, details to refine, trust to build. But I wanted to thank you again, not just for saving my life that night, but for showing me a perspective I might never have truly understood otherwise." Jackson considered the younger man thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes getting lost to find a better path forward. I'm cautiously optimistic about where this one might lead." The elevator doors opened, revealing the soaring atrium below. Before stepping in, Jackson turned back to Adam. "Next week is our heritage apple harvest. If you're genuinely interested in understanding what makes Oakridge Valley special, come see it in action. Bring your CEO if he's serious about this new vision. There's knowing something intellectually, and then there's experiencing it firsthand." Adam's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "We'll be there. Just let us know where and when." As the elevator descended, Jackson reflected on the extraordinary turn of events set in motion by a simple act of helping an injured stranger. The outcome remained uncertain. Corporate initiatives changed direction with market wins and leadership transitions. But a door had opened that he had previously thought permanently closed. The possibility of development that respected rather than erased agricultural heritage. The sunshine greeting Jackson as he exited the Helios headquarters seemed symbolic somehow, illuminating new possibilities where shadows of inevitable loss had previously loomed. The journey home to Oakridge Valley would be long, but for the first time in years, Jackson felt hope rather than resignation about the future of the land his family had stewarded for generations. The following Monday dawned clear and cool. Perfect weather for the heritage apple harvest that had been a Miller family tradition for over a century. Jackson surveyed the orchard with satisfaction as community members arrived, many bringing children and grandchildren to participate in this annual ritual that connected present to past through the tangible act of gathering fruit. What made this year different was the presence of two unexpected participants. Adam Chen, now moving with the aid of a single crutch as his leg continued healing, and Adrian Zhao himself, both dressed in casual clothes that nonetheless marked them as city visitors rather than long-time valley residents. They stood somewhat awkwardly at the orchard entrance, clearly unsure of their place in this community gathering. Jackson approached them with a welcoming nod. "Glad you could make it. Hope you brought your work gloves." Adrian Zhao looked momentarily startled, then smiled with genuine warmth. "We did, actually. Adam insisted they were essential equipment." "Smart man," Jackson approved. "Let me introduce you to the community you're proposing to transform, and the trees that have been feeding this valley since before any of our grandparents were born." What followed was not a formal tour or a corporate presentation, but simple immersion in the harvest process. Jackson paired Zhao with Eleanor, whose no-nonsense approach would ensure the tech CEO experienced authentic farm work rather than a sanitized version, while he guided Adam through the orchard, explaining the unique characteristics of each heritage variety and the specific harvesting techniques they required. "These Gravenstein apples," Jackson explained, demonstrating the gentle twisting motion that released ripe fruit without damaging next year's fruiting buds, "were brought to this valley by my great-grandfather. They're not commercially viable by modern standards, too delicate for long-distance shipping, inconsistent size, short shelf life, but their flavor complexity is unmatched, and they make preserves that win regional competitions every year." Adam carefully mimicked Jackson's harvesting technique, his movements awkward at first, but increasingly confident as muscle memory developed. "The differentiation in each variety is remarkable," he observed, comparing the Gravenstein to the northern spy they had harvested earlier. "Modern commercial operations focus on standardization, but there's incredible value in this diversity. Value that can't be measured solely in market terms," Jackson agreed. "These varieties represent genetic resilience, cultural heritage, flavor profiles that connect people to place. Industrial agriculture sacrifices these qualities for uniformity and shelf stability." Throughout the morning, Jackson noticed how Adam gradually relaxed into the rhythm of the harvest, his corporate persona giving way to genuine engagement with both the work and the community members who shared stories of valley history as they filled their baskets. Even more surprising was Adrian Zhao, who despite his billionaire status worked alongside Eleanor with determined focus, asking thoughtful questions about soil management and water conservation between apple pickings. At midday, the community gathered for a traditional harvest lunch, long tables set up beneath ancient oak trees laden with dishes made from farm ingredients, everyone contributing something to the shared meal. Jackson watched with interest as Adam and Adrian were naturally integrated into the community gathering, initially seated with polite curiosity by their neighbors, but soon engaged in animated conversations about everything from cider production to climate adaptation strategies. "Your tech executives are fitting in better than I expected," Eleanor commented, joining Jackson at the cider press where he was demonstrating the traditional process to a group of children. "Especially Zhao. He's got Eleanor Mason sharing her secret pie crust recipe, and she doesn't do that for just anyone." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "They're experiencing what we've been trying to explain, that this valley isn't just land. For development, it's a living community with deep roots and valuable knowledge. Some things have to be felt to be understood." As the afternoon progressed, the community transitioned from harvesting to processing, sorting apples for different uses, preparing some for storage, others for immediate processing into cider, sauce, and preserves. Jackson found Adrian Zhao at the antique cider press, fascinated by the mechanical efficiency of the century-old device. "This press was designed and built by my grandfather," Jackson explained, joining him. "Hand-forged components, white oak frame that's been preserved with natural oils for generations. Still works perfectly after 100 years of use." "That's extraordinary longevity," Zhao observed, running his hand appreciatively over the smoothly worn wood. We design our products with planned obsolescence measured in years, not centuries. Different design philosophies for different purposes, Jackson acknowledged. But there's wisdom in creating things that last, that can be repaired rather than replaced, that gain value and function through continued use. Zhao studied the farmer with new respect. That perspective is precisely what we've been missing in our development approach. We design for novelty and disruption, not continuity and heritage. He hesitated, then added, I understand your skepticism about our revised Oakridge proposal. Corporate promises often evaporate when challenged by financial pressures or leadership changes. I've seen it happen before, Jackson confirmed. Grand visions reduced to token gestures once construction begins. Which is why I've been thinking about structural guarantees, Zhao continued, surprising Jackson with his directness. The Stewardship Council we discussed needs legal authority independent of Helios's corporate structure, binding covenants on land use, agricultural preservation zones, with permanent easements, profit-sharing models that ensure economic sustainability for farming operations within the development. Jackson's eyebrows rose at the specificity of these proposals. You've given this serious thought. Adam's accident was a wake-up call in more ways than one, Zhao admitted. It forced us to pause and reconsider not just this project, but our entire approach to development. The experience made me realize how disconnected I've become from the real-world impacts of our corporate decisions. Their conversation was interrupted as Adam approached, carrying baskets of sorted apples with a group of local children who had adopted him as an honorary harvest helper. Despite his healing leg, he had thrown himself into the community work with surprising enthusiasm. Jackson, Adam called, the preservation team is asking for guidance on this year's cider apple ratios. They said something about the wine sap crop being stronger than expected. I'll be right there, Jackson responded, then turned back to Zhao. We should continue this conversation. The details matter as much as the vision. Zhao nodded agreement. I'd like that, and I'd like to bring our design and legal teams to meet with community representatives, not for presentations but for listening sessions. There's clearly knowledge here that we need to incorporate from the beginning, not as an afterthought. As the day progressed into evening, the atmosphere transformed from work gathering to celebration. Lanterns were hung from orchard trees, tables rearranged for a communal dinner, and local musicians unpacked instruments for the traditional harvest dance that had marked this season in Oakridge Valley for generations. Jackson found himself seated at a table with Adam, Adrian, Eleanor, and several long-time Valley residents, the conversation flowing as naturally as the fresh-pressed cider being shared in mason jars. The initial awkwardness between the tech executives and the rural community had dissolved through shared work and purpose, replaced by genuine exchange of ideas and experiences. I've been thinking about what you said regarding the apple varieties, Adam said to Jackson during a lull in the conversation, about their value transcending market metrics. It applies to so much of what we've seen today: the intergenerational knowledge transfer, the community cooperation, the integration of celebration with productivity. Jackson nodded. These are the elements that sustainable communities are built on, elements that can't be designed from scratch or imposed from outside, but need to be recognized and preserved when they already exist. Which is precisely where our original development model failed, Adrian interjected. We approached Oakridge Valley as a blank canvas for our vision, rather than a living system with its own inherent wisdom and value. Eleanor, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward. The question is whether a corporate development, even a reimagined one, can genuinely integrate with what already exists here without fundamentally disrupting it. That's the challenge we want to address, Adam replied earnestly. Not how to minimize damage, but how to enhance what's already working while adding new dimensions of opportunity. As darkness fell completely and the music grew livelier, Jackson observed Adam and Adrian being drawn into the traditional dancing, their initial reluctance giving way to wholehearted participation as community members patiently demonstrated the steps. There was something profoundly hopeful in watching the tech billionaire and his innovation officer stumbling through century-old dance patterns, laughing at their mistakes, and trying again with determined good humor. Later, as the celebration continued under star-filled skies, Jackson found a moment of quiet at the orchard's edge. The valley stretched before him, silver-touched by moonlight, the patchwork of small farms and woodlands creating a landscape that told the story of generations, working in partnership with natural systems rather than against them. Adam joined him, leaning on his crutch, but moving with increasing confidence. "I understand now why you were so concerned about our original development plans," he said quietly. "Today has been illuminating. This isn't just land to be acquired and repurposed. It's a complex, living community." Jackson nodded, appreciating the genuine understanding in the younger man's voice. Yet change is inevitable. The valley can't remain frozen in time. That leads to its own kind of decline. The question is whether change enhances or diminishes what matters most. "That's the challenge Adrian and I have been discussing," Adam replied. "How to create a development model that strengthens rather than replaces the agricultural heritage, that creates economic opportunities without destroying the land's productivity, that brings new people and ideas while respecting established wisdom." "An ambitious goal," Jackson acknowledged. "One that will require continued conversation, not just with me, but with everyone who calls this valley home." Adam's expression was thoughtful as he gazed across the moonlit landscape. What if the Helios campus itself became part of the agricultural system rather than replacing it? Buildings designed around existing orchards, integrated growing spaces, research facilities focused on enhancing traditional practices with appropriate technology, housing that incorporates productive landscapes. "You're describing something that doesn't exist yet," Jackson observed, "at least not at the scale you're proposing." "Exactly," Adam agreed, a spark of excitement in his voice. "Not just a sustainable corporate campus, but a regenerative one, a place where technology and agriculture evolve together, where employees don't just work, but participate in land stewardship, where the boundary between development and farming blurs until they become complementary rather than competitive." Jackson considered this vision, testing it against his practical knowledge of the land and its needs. "Ambitious," he repeated, "but not impossible. The key would be starting from the valley's existing patterns and working with them, rather than imposing an external design. That's why we need your involvement, you and others who carry this multi-generational knowledge," Adam insisted. "Not as consultants to be politely listened to and then ignored, but as essential partners in the design process itself." As their conversation continued, outlining possibilities that neither had imagined before their unexpected meeting during the storm, the harvest celebration carried on around them, a living example of the community cohesion and agricultural tradition they were working to preserve and enhance. From this unlikely beginning, a simple farmer helping an injured hiker who turned out to be a tech executive, a new possibility was emerging. Development that honored rather than erased agricultural heritage, technology that served rather than supplanted community wisdom, change that built upon rather than destroyed generational knowledge. It was, Jackson reflected, a reminder that the most promising innovations often arose not from disruption for its own sake, but from thoughtful integration of proven wisdom with new possibilities. And sometimes it took getting knocked off the established path, literally in Adam's case, to see alternatives that had been there all along, waiting to be recognized. As they rejoined the celebration, Jackson noticed Adrian Zhao deep in conversation with Eleanor and several other long-time Valley residents, his expression genuinely engaged rather than diplomatically patient. The tech billionaire who had arrived, as a curious outsider, was now participating as a potential partner, listening more than speaking, absorbing the lived experience of the community his company had initially planned to transform without truly understanding. It was a beginning, not an end, a first step on a path that would require consistent commitment, structural guarantees, and ongoing dialogue to maintain. But it was more than Jackson had dared hope for when he first heard of Helios's plans for Oakridge Valley. The future remained unwritten, but new possibilities had opened where only conflict had seemed possible before. The heritage apples gathered that day represented more than just a harvest. They embodied the principle at the heart of this emerging vision that the most resilient systems preserve valuable heritage while adaptively responding to changing conditions, that wisdom accumulated through generations could enhance rather than hinder technological innovation, and that progress measured in genuine well-being might sometimes move at the pace of seasonal cycles rather than quarterly earnings. Reports. As the evening deepened and community members began drifting homeward with baskets of apples and preserves to see them through the coming winter, Jackson found himself filled with cautious hope. The encounter that had begun with a cry for help on a storm-swept ridge had evolved into something none of them could have anticipated, a potential partnership that might demonstrate a new way forward, not just for Oakridge Valley, but for the essential relationship between technological progress and agricultural heritage across rural communities facing similar pressures. It was, in its own quiet way, revolutionary, not through dramatic confrontation or uncompromising resistance, but through the patient, persistent work of finding common ground where competing visions could strengthen rather than destroy each other. And it had begun, as so many profound changes do, with the simple human response to another's need, regardless of background or circumstance. "You know," Adam remarked as they watched the celebration gradually winding down, "when I fell on that ridge, I was convinced it was the worst thing that could have happened to our development plans. Now I'm thinking it might have been the best. Not just for Oakridge Valley, but for Helios itself. We were about to make a tremendous mistake based on incomplete understanding." Jackson nodded, the wisdom of 5 generations infusing his response. The land has a way of teaching those willing to listen. Sometimes the lesson comes through storm and injury, sometimes through harvest and celebration. The key is being open to receiving it, however it arrives. As they stood together, watching the moonlight silvering the ancient orchards, the unlikely alliance between weathered farmer and tech executive embodied a truth as old as agriculture itself, that the most enduring innovations arise not from dismissing tradition, but from honoring its wisdom while thoughtfully embracing new possibilities, finding the fertile ground where heritage and progress can flourish together, each strengthening rather than diminishing the other. The harvest was complete, the celebration ending, but something new had taken root in Oakridge Valley, something that, with proper tending, might yield fruit for generations to come. 6 months after the heritage apple harvest, Oakridge Valley had transformed in ways both visible and subtle. Spring had arrived with particular vibrancy, as though the land itself sensed the shifting possibilities taking root alongside the season's natural renewal. On the site of the former Henderson farm, where abandoned fields had slowly reverted to scrubland over decades of neglect, a new kind of development was emerging, one unlike anything the valley had seen before, yet somehow in harmony with its essential character. Jackson Miller stood at the edge of his orchard, observing the distant activity with cautious optimism. Construction crews moved with unusual precision, their work carefully contained within boundaries established by the Valley Stewardship Council. Boundaries that protected critical watersheds, pollinator corridors, and heritage agricultural zones. The buildings taking shape featured living architecture principles, many incorporating productive growing spaces into their very design. Between these structures, restoration ecologists worked alongside local farmers, rehabilitating soil depleted by decades of conventional agriculture. "Still can't quite believe it's actually happening," came Eleanor's voice as she joined Jackson at the orchard boundary. "And not just happening, but happening right." Jackson nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. "They're honoring the agreements so far. The Stewardship Council has real authority, not just advisory capacity. Local farmers are being integrated into the planning process, not just consulted for show. All because you pulled a tech executive from a ravine during a storm," Eleanor marveled, shaking her head. "Life takes remarkable turns sometimes." "It's not that simple," Jackson replied, though a small smile creased his eyes. "What's happening here isn't just because of one rescue or one conversation. It's because enough people on both sides recognize something true, that progress doesn't have to erase what came before, that technology and tradition can strengthen rather than oppose each other." As they spoke, a sleek electric vehicle approached, along the farm road, recognizable as one of the prototypes from Helios's Sustainable Transportation Division. It pulled up nearby, and Adam Chen emerged, his leg now fully healed, though he still moved with a slight favoring of his right side, a permanent reminder of the fall that had altered both his physical mobility and his professional perspective. "Jackson, Eleanor," he greeted warmly, the corporate formality that had marked their first real conversation, long since replaced by genuine friendship. "I thought I'd find you watching the construction. The first habitat restoration zones are showing remarkable progress. The native pollinators are already returning to areas we replanted just 3 months ago. Nature responds quickly when given the right conditions," Jackson observed. "That's something 5 generations of farming teaches you. The land wants to thrive if we work with its patterns rather than against them." Adam nodded, his expression reflecting the profound shift in perspective that had occurred since his unplanned arrival in Oakridge Valley. That's becoming the guiding principle for the entire development. Work with patterns, not against them. We've actually incorporated it into the official project ethos. Speaking of the project, Eleanor interjected, the community meeting yesterday was quite something. I've never seen such engagement between corporate representatives and valley residents. People felt genuinely heard. Adrian has made this project a personal priority, Adam confirmed. He's been remarkably hands-on, especially with the agricultural integration components, which is actually why I'm here today. He turned to Jackson with evident excitement. The Heritage Seed Bank facility is ready for your inspection. As chair of the Agricultural Preservation Committee, we need your approval before the final systems are activated. Jackson's eyebrows rose slightly. The Heritage Seed Bank had been one of his most ambitious proposals during the project's reimagining, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to preserving and studying the valley's remarkable agricultural diversity, particularly the heirloom fruit varieties his family had maintained for generations. I didn't expect it to be completed so quickly, he admitted. It wasn't scheduled for Phase 1 development. Adam's expression turned slightly sheepish. Adrian reprioritized it after the Harvest Festival. He became quite passionate about the apple preservation program in particular, said something about that Northern Spy cider changing his perspective on agricultural heritage. Eleanor laughed, remembering the tech billionaire's evident delight in the traditional cider pressing process. Converting the mighty through their taste buds, the oldest strategy in the farming playbook. Jackson gathered his field notes and joined Adam in the vehicle for the short drive to the developing campus area. As they traveled, the landscape revealed the truly integrated approach taking shape. Rather than a monolithic corporate complex, the Helios presence was distributing itself thoughtfully across the landscape, with natural systems and agricultural production woven between development zones. It was, Jackson reflected, remarkably similar to the vision he had outlined during their first real conversation in his farmhouse, perhaps even more ambitious in its execution. The satellite monitoring confirms what we suspected, Adam was saying, gesturing toward distant fields where experimental cover crop combinations created distinct patterns visible even from ground level. The nitrogen fixation rates in the heritage clover varieties from your collection are outperforming modern commercial strains by nearly 30%, especially when paired with the mycorrhizal inoculation techniques your family has used for generations. Jackson nodded, unsurprised. Modern breeding often selects for traits that look impressive in isolated test plots under ideal conditions, not for resilience in complex real-world systems. My great-grandfather wasn't trying to maximize short-term yield. He was building soil health for decades of sustained productivity, which is precisely what makes your family's agricultural archive so valuable, Adam agreed, steering the vehicle toward a distinctive structure rising from the former Henderson property. Traditional knowledge and modern science working together rather than in opposition. The seed bank facility itself represented this philosophy in physical form, a building designed with cutting-edge biophilic architecture principles, its systems powered by renewable energy, yet directly inspired by traditional root cellars and seed storage approaches that had preserved agricultural diversity for centuries before refrigeration existed. As they parked and approached the entrance, Jackson noticed something that made him pause. The facility's name, engraved in locally quarried stone above the main doors. The Miller Heritage Agriculture Center. "You didn't mention this part," he said quietly to Adam, genuinely moved by the unexpected recognition. Adam smiled. It was a unanimous decision by the Stewardship Council and the Helios Board. This center exists because your family preserved agricultural heritage when market forces pushed toward homogenization. 5 generations of millers kept these varieties alive when everyone else abandoned them for commercially profitable monocultures. The name acknowledges that without your family's stewardship, there would be nothing here to preserve and study. Inside, the facility seamlessly blended traditional wisdom with technological innovation. Climate-controlled storage chambers maintained optimal conditions for different seed types, while advanced genomic sequencing equipment allowed researchers to study and document the unique characteristics of heritage varieties. Throughout the building, Jackson noticed design elements that honored agricultural traditions. Exposed wooden beams salvaged from century-old barns, artifact displays of historical farming implements, and instructional exhibits explaining traditional seed-saving techniques alongside modern preservation methods. Dr. Prisha Mehta, the renowned agricultural geneticist whom Helios had recruited to lead the center's research program, guided them through the facility with evident enthusiasm. The integration of traditional ecological knowledge with contemporary science creates extraordinary research opportunities, she explained. "For instance, we've been analyzing soil samples from your farm's undisturbed woodland edges, Mr. Miller. The microbial diversity is unprecedented. We've already identified 17 fungal species previously undocumented in agricultural settings." As they toured laboratory spaces, seed vaults, and educational areas designed for community workshops, Jackson found himself increasingly impressed by how thoroughly his initial vision had been expanded and enhanced. This wasn't a token sustainability initiative or corporate greenwashing. It represented a fundamental rethinking of the relationship between technological development and agricultural heritage. "The community access programs begin next month," Dr. Mehta continued, showing them classrooms equipped for everything from traditional food preservation workshops to advanced agricultural biotechnology seminars. Local farmers will teach alongside Helios researchers, with programs for everyone from children to professional agriculturalists. We're particularly excited about the mentorship initiative pairing experienced valley farmers with young people interested in sustainable agriculture careers. "Creating pathways for knowledge transmission beyond family lines," Jackson observed, approvingly. "That's essential for preserving not just the seeds, but the cultural practices that give them context." The tour culminated in the facility's heart, a circular chamber where the most precious and endangered heritage seeds were stored in specialized containment systems, their genetic information backed up both digitally and through living cultivation, in protected growing areas throughout the campus. "We need your final approval before fully activating the preservation systems," Adam explained, gesturing toward a sophisticated control panel. "As committee chair, you have the honor of bringing the facility online." Jackson studied the activation sequence carefully, then looked up at the assembled team. Adam Chen, whose accidental arrival had catalyzed this unexpected transformation. Dr. Mehta, whose scientific brilliance was now dedicated to preserving agricultural heritage. The Helios engineers who had designed systems mimicking natural processes rather than substituting for them. and the local farmers who'd been integrated into the project as valued knowledge keepers rather than obstacles to progress. "This is just the beginning," he said, his weathered hand hovering over the activation control. "The real measure of success will be whether these partnerships endure beyond initial enthusiasm, whether the knowledge flows in both directions rather than one, whether the economic models truly support sustainable agriculture alongside technological innovation." "Agreed," Adam replied seriously, "which is why the legal framework Adrian insisted upon places control firmly with the Stewardship Council, not with Helios's corporate governance. This center and the entire integrated development model is designed to outlast any single company's involvement." Jackson nodded, satisfied, and initiated the sequence. Around them, subtle changes rippled through the chamber as environmental systems calibrated to optimal preservation conditions, data collection protocols activated, and security measures engaged. It was a moment of quiet significance, traditional, wisdom being honored with the full support of one of the world's most powerful technology companies, not as a nostalgic nod to the past, but as essential knowledge for creating a more resilient future. As they exited the facility, Jackson paused to look back at the name carved above the entrance, his family's legacy now permanently interwoven with a vision of progress that honored rather than erased what came before. It was not the future he had expected when Sarah first called about Helios's development plans, but perhaps it was something better, a genuine collaboration rather than mere coexistence or worse, erasure. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you," Adam said, as they walked toward a newly established community garden where Helios employees worked alongside local residents, learning traditional growing techniques while sharing technological innovations. "Adrian has been thinking about the broader implications of what's happening here in Oakridge Valley." "How so?" Jackson asked, noting with approval how the garden design incorporated water conservation principles his grandfather had pioneered during drought years. This integrated development model, it challenges fundamental assumptions about progress, about the relationship between technology and tradition, about how corporations interact with existing communities, Adam explained. "Adrian believes it could be replicated elsewhere, adapted to different regional contexts while maintaining the core philosophy of working with existing patterns rather than imposing external visions." Jackson considered this as they watched the diverse group of gardeners, corporate technologists and rural agriculturalists, elderly keepers of traditional knowledge and young innovators, all working together in shared purpose. It would require genuine commitment, not just superficial adoption. The legal frameworks protecting local authority, the economic models ensuring equitable benefit distribution, the authentic respect for existing knowledge systems, these aren't add-ons, they're foundations. "Exactly," Adam agreed eagerly, "which is why Adrian is establishing a new division within Helios, the Integrated Development Institute. Its purpose will be documenting, refining, and adapting what we're learning here for application in other contexts, and he wants you to co-direct it alongside me." Jackson stopped walking, genuinely surprised by the offer. "Me? I'm a farmer, not a corporate executive or development expert. That's precisely why it needs to be you," Adam insisted. This approach doesn't work if it's led solely by technology perspectives. The agricultural wisdom your family has preserved, the multi-generational view of stewardship, the practical knowledge of working with rather than against natural systems, these are exactly the counterbalances needed to prevent the model from drifting back toward conventional development patterns. The proposition was unexpected, forcing Jackson to consider possibilities he had never imagined for himself. His life had been defined by tending the land his ancestors had stewarded, preserving their wisdom while adapting to changing conditions. The thought of extending that work beyond Oakridge Valley, of helping shape development, approaches that honored rather than erased agricultural heritage in communities facing similar pressures, was both daunting and compelling. "I'd need to maintain my farm operations," he said finally. "The practical connection to the land is essential to the perspective I'd bring." "Of course," Adam nodded enthusiastically. "In fact, your continued farming is crucial to the Institute's credibility. We're not asking you to become a corporate representative, but to ensure the integrated model maintains authentic balance between innovation and heritage." As they continued walking, the conversation delving into potential structures and approaches for this new initiative, Jackson found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. From adversaries with competing visions for the valley's future to partners in reimagining the very relationship between technological progress and agricultural tradition. The seed of this transformation had been a simple act of compassion, a farmer helping an injured stranger during a storm without calculation or agenda. From that seed had grown something neither of them could have anticipated. Not just a reimagined development project, but a fundamentally new approach to reconciling seemingly opposed values and priorities. 6 months later, as spring advanced and the valley's natural abundance asserted itself with particular vigor, evidence of this integrated approach was visible throughout Oakridge Valley. On the former Wallace property, experimental fields showcased heritage crop varieties being studied with advanced monitoring technology. Near the old grain elevator, a revitalized agricultural processing center combined traditional methods with technological enhancements, creating new economic opportunities for small-scale producers. Throughout the developing campus, buildings incorporated living systems principles, many featuring productive landscapes that engaged employees directly in food production. Most significantly, the community itself was transforming, not through replacement, but through thoughtful integration. Young families drawn by new opportunities were learning from long-time residents. Technological expertise was being applied to agricultural challenges, and economic models were being developed that valued ecosystem services alongside conventional metrics of productivity. On a particularly beautiful evening in late May, Jackson hosted a gathering at his farmhouse. Not the formal meetings of the Stewardship Council or the structured workshops of the Heritage Center, but a simple community dinner bringing together the diverse participants in this evolving experiment. Long tables set beneath flowering apple trees accommodated Helios engineers and local farmers, research scientists and traditional knowledge keepers, all sharing food largely grown within the valley itself. Adrian Zhao, who had become a surprisingly regular visitor to Oakridge Valley, raised a glass of heritage apple cider as conversation flowed around the tables. 2 unexpected journeys, he proposed, nodding toward Jackson and Adam, and to the wisdom that emerges when we're knocked off our planned paths. To integration rather than imposition, Jackson added, his own glass raised, and to partnerships that honor both innovation and heritage. As twilight deepened and fireflies began to illuminate the orchard edges, Jackson found himself in conversation with Sarah, who had returned to the valley more frequently since the integrated development began, drawn by the unexpected possibilities. Emerging in a place she had once believed offered no future for someone with her technological interests. "It's not what I expected when I first told you about Helios's plans," she admitted, watching the diverse gathering with evident wonder. "I thought you'd be leading the opposition, organizing protests, fighting a losing battle against inevitable development." Jackson smiled, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. "That was certainly my first instinct. I've spent decades defending this land against outside forces that seem determined to erase everything we've built here." "What changed?" she asked, genuinely curious about her father's transformation from resistant guardian to collaborative partner. Jackson considered the question carefully, his gaze traveling from the heritage orchard to the distant lights of the developing campus, then to the diverse community now gathered at his tables, all connected by a shared commitment to honoring both innovation and tradition. "I realized something during that storm, when I found Adam injured on the ridge," he said finally. "The greatest threat to what I value isn't change itself, but change that disregards existing wisdom. And the greatest opportunity isn't preserving the past exactly as it was, but ensuring its essential wisdom informs the future." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And Adam? What changed for him?" "He experienced this valley not as an abstraction, not as satellite imagery or property assessments or development potential, but as a living community with valuable knowledge embodied in both its people and its natural systems," Jackson explained. "Theory became reality. Abstractions became relationships. That changes perspective in ways that presentations and impact assessments never can." Their conversation was interrupted as Adam approached, accompanied by Dr. Mehta and several other researchers from the Heritage Center. "Jackson, we've made a breakthrough with those drought-resistant grafting techniques your grandfather documented," Adam announced excitedly. "The success rate has increased nearly 40% by integrating his timing protocols with our environmental monitoring systems." What followed was a technically intricate but deeply engaged discussion that perfectly embodied the integrated approach developing in Oakridge Valley. Traditional wisdom providing essential insights that technology alone couldn't discover, while modern tools, enhanced and extended practices, developed through generations of careful observation. Later, as the gathering gradually dispersed and Jackson walked with Eleanor along the orchard rows, the evening's gentle beauty seemed to affirm the path they had found together, not the wholesale transformation that Helios had initially envisioned, nor the rigid preservation of an unchanging past, but something more dynamic and resilient, a community embracing change while honoring continuity, integrating innovation with heritage, finding strength in diversity rather than standardization. "Did you ever imagine, when you climbed that ridge during the storm, that you'd end up co-directing an institute within one of the world's largest technology companies?" Eleanor asked, amusement coloring her voice. Jackson chuckled, shaking his head. "About as much as I imagined Helios's CEO would become passionate about heritage apple varieties, or that our valley would become a model for integrated development being studied around the world." Life takes unexpected turns, Eleanor observed. The wisdom lies in recognizing which ones lead toward greater wholeness rather than fragmentation. As they reached the ridge where Adam had fallen, the precise point where these transformative events had begun, Jackson paused, gazing across the valley now illuminated by both starlight and the thoughtfully designed lighting of the developing campus. The landscape was changing undeniably, but not through erasure. Rather, new elements were being woven into the existing fabric, enhancing rather than replacing the patterns that had sustained this place for generations. "The real test will come with time," he said thoughtfully. "Whether these integrated approaches endure beyond initial enthusiasm, whether the economic models truly support sustainable agriculture alongside technological innovation, whether the balance of power remains equitable as the project matures." "True," Eleanor agreed. "But something fundamental has already shifted. The conversation is no longer about whether development will erase agricultural heritage, but how technological progress and traditional wisdom can strengthen each other. That alone represents extraordinary change." Jackson nodded, acknowledging the truth in her observation. The future remained unwritten, the experiment still unfolding, but the principles guiding it had been transformed through an unexpected encounter between a weathered farmer and a tech executive. An encounter that had evolved from crisis to conversation, to collaboration, revealing possibilities neither had initially imagined. As they turned back toward the farmhouse, the distant sounds of the departing gathering still carrying faintly on the evening breeze, Jackson reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them here, and on the simple truth that had made it possible that wisdom accumulated through generations of working with the land could enhance rather than hinder technological innovation, that progress measured in genuine well-being might move at the pace of seasonal cycles rather than quarterly reports, and that the most promising future might emerge not from disruption for its own sake, but from thoughtful integration of proven heritage with new possibilities. It was a perspective embodied in the very orchards surrounding them, where careful grafting joined heritage genetics to new rootstock, creating trees that honored their ancestors while adapting to present conditions. The wisdom lay not in rejecting change nor in erasing the past, but in finding the fertile ground where tradition and innovation could flourish together, each strengthening rather than diminishing the other. The development taking shape in Oakridge Valley wasn't perfect. Compromise and challenge remained integral to the process, but it represented something profoundly hopeful. The possibility that technological progress and agricultural heritage might not be locked in inevitable conflict, that communities facing development pressure might find paths beyond simple resistance or wholesale transformation, that the wisdom accumulated through generations of working with natural systems might meaningfully inform rather than be discarded by technological innovation. And it had begun, as so many transformative journeys do, with the simple human response to another's need, a response uncalculated and genuine, yet ultimately profound in its consequences. 1 year to the day after Adam's fall, Jackson Miller stood on the same ridge where he had found the injured executive, watching as the spring sunset illuminated Oakridge Valley. The landscape had changed, certainly, but not through erasure or replacement. Rather, new elements had been thoughtfully integrated into existing patterns, enhancing rather than disrupting the complex systems that had sustained this place for generations. What had begun as a simple act of compassion, a farmer helping an injured hiker during a storm, had evolved into something neither could have anticipated: a reimagining of the relationship between technological progress and agricultural heritage, between corporate development and community wisdom, between innovation and tradition. The lesson lay not in the specific forms this integration had taken in Oakridge Valley, which were necessarily unique to this place and these people, but in the underlying principle that the most promising innovations often arise not from dismissing tradition, but from honoring its wisdom while thoughtfully embracing new possibilities, finding the fertile ground where heritage and progress can flourish together, each strengthening rather than diminishing the other. As Jackson descended the ridge toward home, where a new season's work awaited his attention, he carried this understanding not as abstract philosophy, but as lived experience. A reminder that even in an age dominated by technological disruption and corporate power, the quiet persistence of those who steward the land and the wisdom they embody can still shape the narrative of progress in profound and unexpected ways. And in that understanding lay hope, not just for Oakridge Valley, but for communities everywhere navigating the complex relationship between honoring heritage and embracing change. A hope grounded in the recognition that the most sustainable path forward might not require choosing between past and future, but thoughtfully integrating the wisdom of both. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.